and provided plentiful ammunition for Thatcher's campaign to bring down the government.
Tayside said no. Grampian said no. There is no sound or honourable basis for the great constitutional change which Labour have proposed. And the final insult would be for this dying government to try to bend our constitution to keep themselves in power for a few more wretched weeks.
On the 28th of March, 1979, Margaret Thatcher brought a vote of no confidence and won by one vote. James Callaghan was the first Prime Minister since Ramsay MacDonald in 1924 to be forced into an election by the Chamber. The result was far from a foregone conclusion, but the Thatcher gamble paid off. Callaghan sought the Queen's permission to dissolve Parliament as soon, he said, as a central business can be cleaned up.
You're looking very cheerful this morning. Are you in good spirits?
I always look forward to a good fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Not physically, of course.
He was going down in the polls, and the people were saying he must stop these strikes, and this is terrible. They're getting worse and worse. And every time a strike was settled, a new strike would be announced the next day. It was a terrible period for him. And those who were his opponents couldn't be more delighted at the bad time he was having.
Following their success in defeating the government, there was jubilation in the Tory ranks, but not for long. On the 30th of March, Airy Neave was assassinated in the House of Commons car park.
Terrible news.
Margaret Thatcher's right-hand man, he'd encouraged her to go for the leadership and would have undoubtedly played a leading role in her government. But that was not to be.
He was one of freedom's warriors. No one knew what a great man he was, how great a man he was, except those nearest to him. He was staunch, brave, true, strong, but he was very gentle and kind and loyal. It's a rare combination of qualities. There's no one else who can quite fill them. I and so many other people owe so much to him. And now we must carry on for the things he fought for and not let the people who got him triumph.
We do, to that end, publish this our royal proclamation, and do hereby dissolve the said Parliament accordingly.
The election was finally announced on the 9th of April.
Good morning, Mrs. Thatcher. Mrs. Thatcher, can we have a little word about tactics before you go? Mr. Callaghan is off today in Scotland starting his campaign. Maybe perhaps ask you why you aren't doing the same.
Because we're just taking a little bit longer to plan. This is the longest campaign we've ever had. You know, in February 74, on October 74, we wouldn't even have had an election announced yet. And I'm just a little bit fearful that people might get fed up with us before the end of the campaign. And I think what's important is that you finish strongly.
Do you think you're giving him a head start at all?
As the campaign began, and despite Labour's loss of power, Callaghan was ahead of Margaret Thatcher in the opinion polls. But by now, the Conservative Party had on board an ex-TV producer, Gordon Rees, employed to promote the Tory brand.
When people now tend to blame people like Tony Blair and so on for introducing, quote, American electioneering tactics into British politics, not a bit of it. It was Gordon Rees and Margaret Thatcher. And between them, they decided that the old-fashioned way of doing things, the flinging of a Union Jack over a table in a village hall, wasn't good enough. And so he was fascinated to hear from me how the Americans had done it. And then particularly, he wanted to know what we in the television business would want during an election campaign. And we talked a lot about how we had to get to feed points and how we had to send things down the line, because this was the days before satellites were commonly used. This was astonishing. This was absolutely astonishing. I had never known any British political party really take any interest at all in what the media wanted. It was normally a case up to then of what the media was going to get.
Mrs. Thatcher, too, did her best to display her prodigious energy, racing around the country on a ceaseless exercise in self-promotion.
Come right round, now listen, I'm not standing for 20 minutes now.
Everywhere she went, she was regarded not with love and affection, but with curiosity and interest. And the crowds would come out. Maggie would go into a high street and the crowds would instantly come out. It was very significant at that time that when Jim Callaghan did the same, went on walkabout, that he didn't get the same sort of response. People would be ignoring him or simply not showing the same sort of curiosity about him. And it wasn't so much a matter of politics at the time, it was a matter of personality. She had a different personality, a personality with a rough edge, a sharp edge, but that seemed to fascinate people too, and they responded.
During the election campaign, Mrs. Thatcher said the Conservatives would cut income tax, reduce public expenditure, make it easier for people to buy their own homes, and curb the power of the unions.
You know, I just think it's simply terrible for people listening to us when you put a similar question to each of the party leaders and they all say, yes, 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 we're very confident. So I say we've got very good grounds to be optimistic.
The 79 election was quite cautious and a great deal centred on just the state of the public finances and the state of public debts. The balance of payments, which always featured far too much in economic conversation then, and the general air of malaise in the country. But the idea we set out, Margaret set out, a fiercely sort of free market, liberal, capitalist agenda, is a complete myth. We'd have lost even to Jim Callaghan if we'd done that at the time.
A lot of the language of opposition when you are trying to get into government has to be reassurance. And people forget at this distance how much of the language of Margaret Thatcher in the 70s was reassurance, that Conservatives could live with trade unions. There was very little mention of privatisation in the 1970s. She went out of her way not to scare the electorate.
Plainclothes police out of a car behind her. Mrs. Thatcher out onto the doorstep.
On the 4th of May, Margaret Thatcher was elected Prime Minister with a Commons majority of 43 seats. On arriving at Downing Street, she made one of the most memorable, if not universally well-received speeches of her prime ministerial career.
It's the greatest honour that can come to any citizen in a democracy. I know full well the responsibilities that await me as I enter the door of number 10. And I'll strive unceasingly to try to fulfill the trust and confidence that the British people have placed in me and the things in which I believe. And I would just like to remember some words of St. Francis of Assisi, which I think are really just particularly apt at the moment. Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith, and where there is despair, may we bring hope.
St. Francis of Assisi, the lines that she used outside of Downing Street were not her lines, and of course they didn't represent her feelings at all, her real feelings. She didn't know what to say on the doorstep. She wanted ideas, and one of her greatest colleagues and friends and her speechwriter, Ronnie Miller, who was a wonderful playwright, came up with these lines for her. They were lines which would have done for any politician, for any Prime Minister. Sadly, they weren't the lines that really reflected Maggie Thatcher, but they did for the moment, and did rather well, got a lot of notoriety, and were then put in the drawer and forgotten.
The girl from Grantham had travelled a long way. It was an astonishing achievement. The first female leader of a British political party was now Prime Minister. She had risen from nowhere to the top of what was a man's world. She had defeated her own prediction of how far a woman could travel in politics.
Well, she's now doing an almost papal handshake, going down Downing Street, shaking every hand that she can possibly get hold of. There is great enthusiasm.
Her election had captured the imagination at home and sparked enormous interest abroad. The first female leader of the Western world had assumed power, and little did anyone fully appreciate it then, but a new political era had truly begun.